knowing how museums like fine arts museums and natural history museums have created harmful racist stereotypes, as well as how they continue to promote white supremacy, is essential to confronting the reality of how you may have been educated about cultures other than your own. Because it is how we see each other in exhibitions, in social media, and on television that directly affects how we treat each other and how we work with one another and how we understand one another as a community. And it may be hard for people to believe how their favorite museum could engage in such practices, especially when you consider how museums are supposed to be trustworthy sites of education. However, as a first-generation Indigenous scholar, I can attest to how detrimental representation within a museum can be for the communities that I identify with. How? Well, in the late 19th century, large natural history museums were created to salvage the remnants of what was perceived to be the dying race, Indians, Native Americans, as well as to celebrate the success of settler colonialism in taming primitive cultures. So what would happen? People, anthropologists would go out into indigenous communities and collect our material culture, and in some cases, human remains, in order to create exhibitions that would scientifically prove, in their eyes at least, our cultural and racial inferiority. When they did that, once they were done, they would come back to their host city and they would go ahead and create exhibitions that would then relay their findings. They would tell the public of all of the things that they discovered about Indigenous people and put our culture into cases that was oftentimes romanticized and very harmful and disgusting for how, when you think about the way that we were seen in that way. And that is how, honestly, how many people have seen us for a very long time. It has taken museums a great number of years to move past these representations and to actually engage with us to create something that is different. So even though museums might have been doing this work for over 30 years to try to rectify these past transgressions, it has been hard and it has not been easy. And many times, museums don't want to do this work. They often fear it, and honestly, they're doing their visitors an injustice by doing so. Meaning that if they don't tell their visitors what they did was harmful, and if they don't create a change in how they talk about that history, why they were wrong, and what they're going to continue to do, then we're not able to fully grow as a society. Now, I know this because as a Northern Paiute, Mexican-American, Indigenous scholar, I have witnessed the way that representation has harmed the people that I love. For example, many of my family members were beaten for speaking their native languages. Many were sent to boarding school in an effort to kill the Indian and save the man. Many were forced to work in horrendous conditions, such as on farms. And many were denied access to basic necessities, all because of their brown skin, all because that they were Native American, identified as a savage Native American, and as a dirty Mexican. Unfortunately, a lot of my family members engaged with substances that would alter their minds and their hearts, creating different levels of trauma that my current generation is still dealing with today. And one way that I'm doing this type of healing is by engaging in higher education. I decided to pursue an education because I wanted to better understand the history of the way that my family interacted with one another and what created such disloyalty within my family. And when that happened, I also wanted to create an understanding of how embedded racism is in our educational system. Eventually, I was able to create exhibitions that did the exact opposite of what those anthropologists did in the 1900s, such as being able to create exhibitions with those same cultural items that told our stories in a very respectful and honorable and much more decent way. However, it has also been while on this journey that I have discovered just how much white supremacy continues to live within inside of a museum, meaning that most fine arts and natural history museums are still ran by white privileged males who advocate for the creation of exhibitions that appeal to a certain audience, typically a 40-year-old white woman from the suburbs. And when they make this decision, mostly because they need to be able to market it to their target audience, they completely ignore the realities and the ideas of the communities that are represented within their collection. Most importantly, they are ignoring how Indigenous people have been able to survive, not only here in North America, but across the world. And so, in addition to this, they have also made it hard for people to come into the museum to do the work of changing them. Meaning that when people want to do decolonization work, which is usually moving the museum away from its colonial roots, they often tokenize those of us who are doing it. They call us bullies if we don't follow museum policy, and they also tokenize us and, in some cases, gaslight us and create traumatic experiences that we have to carry on. And it is as my favorite killjoy feminist says, when you expose a problem, you pose a problem. Now, this work is very, very hard, and as much as I wish that it wasn't like this, it is necessary if we are ever going to continue to build and create a society that we can all be proud of. Meaning that if Indigenous people, if people of color are going to be able to access these spaces, then museums need to become much more inclusive and understanding of how their own histories have continued to harm people of color, including Indigenous people. And I say this as well as to think about, imagine being able to go into a museum collection as an Indigenous person to heal parts of yourself that were stolen from you from the beginning. Meaning, imagine when those anthropologists walked in, stole your cultural items, and then 100 years later, being able to reconnect with them, being able to learn from them, being able to sing their songs. How powerful that can be, the lessons you could take back with to your community, and also what you can take back for yourself. Because a lot of times Indigenous people believe that these items are embedded with stories and songs and ceremonies that their makers placed in them upon their creation, and that they are much more than just a piece or an artifact. And that is what we need to transpire across in museum exhibitions. Not what people think we are, but who we actually are. Because Native people didn't vanish. We're here. I'm here, giving this talk, something that maybe people probably, especially those founders of those museums, never thought that I would. So it's important that we have access to these spaces to continue to grow as a society. And that's why I ask you that the next time you go into a museum that houses Indigenous culture, that talks about Indigenous art, Indigenous histories, that you ask yourself a series of questions. Why? Who curated this exhibition? Why? Are there Indigenous people involved in this exhibition as well as in the museum as a whole? What story is being told? What story isn't being told? Who made the final decision? How much is marketing and the way that the directors have decided how much to put out there for the world, especially as it relates to the culture? Most importantly, you should ask yourself how brutal, if Indigenous histories, such as the brutal realities of what we faced, is a part of the narrative. Because if it isn't, then you're really not getting to fully understand our survivance and our resiliency. And that might be hard for people to understand, especially when you consider everything I just said about these items having a life force, these items being for us to be able to heal from as still being alive. But that's okay, and it's okay if you don't understand that point of view. Not everything that we do in this world is meant for us to understand, and Indigenous people really firmly believe in that. But I do think that if leadership is dedicated to actually collaborating with Indigenous people, learning from them, and not just putting them out there to be romanticized or taken advantage of, on banners on the side of a museum, then they actually need to teach their employees on what Indigenous worldviews and perspectives are. They actually need to hold white employees who have a lot of privilege accountable when they produce harm that is done to Indigenous people, as well as people of color on the ground and in staff. They also need to learn what it actually means to collaborate with Indigenous people, meaning that they need to be able to sit down with us, learn from us, and understand that we are here, and this land was here for us long before settlement ever occurred. And we're not going anywhere because we haven't gone anywhere yet. And as much as people might fear that, I think it's a great way to celebrate us as well. And for me, thinking about, again, how I'm here, how I'm not supposed to be here, how my family was basically told that you would vanish, that you would no longer survive. I firmly believe that they sang my song a long time ago before I was even born, before I was even alive. And I'm here today to sing their song so that they know, and my future children know, that they are valued beyond all recognition, and that I care about how they are represented in spaces that hold their items, that hold their ancestors. And if I don't do this work now, I'm not honoring them. I'm not honoring the future, and I'm not honoring my family. And so today's legacy and today's talk is dedicated to them, those of the past and those of the future. And I hope that they are proud of me and that they are able to recognize that they are valued even if they are no longer here, that I take them with me everywhere, and that I always will. Thank you.